I'm ready to slash and burn.
No quarter. I am going to be uncomfortable and all over you from start to finish.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Outside of the Box. And I am super excited about this panel today because we're talking about something that is near and dear to my heart, which is unconventional robots. And I have, invited everyone specifically because they have robots that I feel meet this definition of unconventional. So I'm really excited to have all of you, and either welcome or welcome back to the show, depending on what the situation is.
Thanks.
Absolutely. So I'm just going to go around and have everybody introduce themselves, and I'm going to kick it over who is in the order on my side of things. So Eli, you get to go first.
There. Hey everyone, my name is Eli. I'm you might have seen me on Team Sawblaze on the most recent season. You also might have seen my silly robot Hot Wings, which I have the sign for somewhere. There we go. I compete at NHRL mostly for the smaller robots, but I'm an engineer is my job, my day job, and at night I build robots for fun. So I'm glad to be here. Thanks for the invite, and looking forward to the discussion.
Absolutely. Brice.
I'm Brice Farrell. I'm currently on Team Doomba. Before that, it was Mammoth, and before that, it was Battle Royale with Cheese, and I don't think any of those count as conventional.
I mean, I would agree. I think everybody has their own definitions, but I would certainly agree. Joe.
Hi, my name is Joe. I am an industrial designer. I made the robot SMEEEEEEEEE, which is probably what people will know on BattleBots, and I've entered a ton of inane nonsense into NHRL, mostly to amuse myself, but I think SMEEEEEEE is the main one, yeah.
All right, Anna.
Hi, I'm Anna. I'm the captain of RIPperoni, which features an asymmetrical chassis and a stabilizing flywheel on the 250-pound robot. My day job is also mechanical engineer, and I love building wacky stuff.
That is the whole point of all of this. And then Jonathan.
Yeah, my name is Jonathan. I'm also a mechanical engineer. My robot that everyone would be the most familiar with is called Huge. It's the giant two-wheel angry eye monster, really at every weight class at NHRL, at BattleBots. But I've been a lifelong BattleBots fan and robot fighting fan, so that's kind of how I got started.
Absolutely. So the first thing that we're going to talk about, which I thought was a really good question from Matt Lantry, because some people may wonder this, but how do you define what is unconventional? Especially because these days, I think there's such a broad field out there. But, I know for me personally, when I say a robot's unconventional, there's something different about it that's more than just like, hey, this wheel looks different or the paint on this looks different. Like it has to have something really unique that most other robots don't have. But I'm curious to hear from all of you, like what you think unconventional looks like. So I'll go to you first, Eli.
Sure. I mean, I guess it's up to the individual, but for me, I would say that unconventional is something that, like you said, you really don't see it very often. For some reason, I think if you see something unconventional, you feel like something's like not quite right about it. Like it's not maybe fully thought through, or there's like, oh, there's no way they actually did this, like, right? But then they actually did do that. That was the whole point. And I guess we'll talk about this more, but trying to make that, especially in a competitive sport, can be maybe a little more difficult. So I think it's just something that's just not what you see out there. I mean, we talk a lot about vertical spinners and horizontal spinners, and there's kits out there for the smaller weight classes. So staying as far away from possible as those types of things is a good way to be unconventional, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'd add usually something you've never seen before, something that's never been tried before. It doesn't have to be entirely revolutionary, but if there's some aspect that no one's ever done, that definitely counts in my book.
Yeah, Joe?
Yeah, I think I design my robots either to make the YouTube comment section really, really happy or really, really angry with me. Like I want to elicit some kind of instinctual response where it's like, that's too stupid. It shouldn't be allowed. It can't win. Or just like laughter. I think that's fun too. Just like you're there to have fun. I think ultimately you can think about, oh, this weapon's been tried, it hasn't been tried, but the ultimate response is anger, I think.
That's when you know you've made it, is when people are talking about that you should be banned.
Yeah.
I think that that's really a good line. You know, like over the course of this past season, at the beginning of the season, there was posts online of people saying we suck and they shouldn't keep letting us in. And by the end of the season, there was we should be banned. This is out of control. So that's when you know that you've made an impact on people.
Yeah, it's not fair. Huge isn't allowed to be good, and it's not allowed to be bad.
It's
Well,
too big.
it wasn't, and you give it a couple more years, and it might not be. But so let me have this.
Exactly. Anna, what do you think?
Yeah, I think unconventional is a vibe. It's like a feeling you get when you see something and you're like, oh, there's something different about this that I haven't seen before. Or maybe it looks totally normal on the outside and you have to dig deeper and figure out, oh, wow, there's actually something about this that I didn't notice from the start that's really weird that I wasn't expecting to be there. But I think that people also don't agree on what is conventional and what's unconventional. It's kind of like art. Some people find one thing to be super common, maybe because they've worked on that type of robot more often than another. We have been called both conventional and unconventional. So I think it is whatever you think it is.
In some cases that may be the case. Now, this is actually a really good question, especially for Eli, because at the most recent NHRL event, Hot Wings did really well. And, you know, when you look at that robot, it's one of those robots that I'm like, I love it so much, and it shouldn't work, but it does work, and it works wonderfully. So like the big thing is what's that, like, how do you toe that line between building something that works and is successful versus something that's just like a novelty, and you know, that somebody is just like, oh, that's funny or that's cool, but it doesn't really work?
Yeah, it's a great question. So in my case, you know, I've tried to kind of learn as much as I can about these smaller robots, and I'm 34 years old. I've been working as an engineer for 10 plus years now. So like I have a bit of an edge compared to maybe your average builder out there, but I'm also surrounded by so many smart people and teammates like on Sawblaze. So I know what's good, and I take some of those things that are good, like maybe I know how to make a good fork. You know, forks are all the rage right now. I know what makes a good fork, and then I combine that with the weight bonus, in this case, the NHRL gives you, and I'm really able to kind of go wild with that. And even if I make some suboptimal design choices, like maybe the weapon's not as effective, maybe, I'm kind of adding way too much armor just to make sure it doesn't break. But with all those little advantages that I think I personally had, I was able to kind of, maybe get less points in one category, but really like maximize my points in another category. And then those were strong enough to carry me throughout the competition, essentially. My forks were good, my driving was good, my armor was good. So just kind of playing to my strengths, essentially. Even though it's unconventional, doesn't mean it's bad. I think, as everyone here would agree, unconventional does not mean bad. So just, I mean, I did get lucky too. Everything just went really well. I don't know. I can't explain it. We'll see how it goes next competition. That may have been like a one-hit wonder, but I'll take it.
Hey, it's
like
aggressive hugs work. Aggressive hugs work. So.
It's like seeing everything's like little Lego building blocks of function that you steal from other people, right? Like we didn't come up with the wheels, we took it from Gabriel where they worked great, and then smashed that with other things that we actually knew how to do, like build a spinner. In our first event, there was also a lot of luck towards us doing well, but once you see those kind of little pieces, I think that's what, it's not like you're going to be successful before you show up. It's that you start seeing these like little moments where you really do have an advantage, and then you say, well, I could do something with this.
Yeah.
And then, you work on it over time until suddenly you're an overnight success after however so many months and, and years.
That's a good point. Yeah, let me be clear though. Like Hot Wings, I've competed with the 2 other events, and it did not do great. Honestly, I think it was, maybe 4 and 4. I won a couple, I lost a couple, but so this is the 3rd iteration of the robot. It wasn't just amazing right off the get-go. I was my first shuffler. I had to get that working well. There's a lot of tweaks I made along the way. I upgraded the hot ends from like a 3D printer to, be way more powerful. So it wasn't like it happened overnight, like Jonathan said. I really optimized it as much as I could, at least. I think I can go a little bit more in the optimization, but we'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. And Brice, because Doomba certainly, like, Doomba can be a meme, but at the same time, there's some potential there.
There's a lot of potential there. I wish they'd given us more fights or aired all our fights, because there was a very fast learning curve that we were rocking pretty hard, and now we're just trying dumb shit. We're just, can we double the weapon weight? Can we triple the drive speed? And just pushing all those individual systems that we borrowed from previous robots, like Eli was saying, and see how much we can do with that combination.
I think a lot of people don't know about Doomba, like some of the stuff underneath, and they didn't really tell the story on TV very well. Like Doomba's like so unconventional. Like if you look inside that thing, there's like a Roomba like at the core of it still, like. And maybe that's a great idea, maybe it's a horrible idea, but you went and did it. And they talk about rookie seasons a lot, especially on BattleBots. And everyone's rookie season is rough. Sawblaze's rookie season was not the best. You look at RIPperoni, they had an amazing rookie season, and that's not easy to do with such a crazy design, essentially. So
with unconventional bots, though, you really are just rolling the dice the first time you put it in the test box, because it's weird and new. There's not as much data to go off of. You can't say, oh, well, this is what other people did, so I'm going to do the same thing, because that would make it more conventional. So when you're trying something new, you just don't know what's going to happen. And especially with BattleBots, they're so difficult to test. Like we weren't able to test RIPperoni at full power safely at home at all. We had to test all of our systems in isolation in various different test settings. So we didn't know what was going to happen until we got to the box. And we were really excited that things worked how they were designed, but that doesn't always happen on the first shot. So
what you said about there being no canned solution, that's what I love about weird designs. Is normally you can be like, okay, this bot did this bot did this, we'll do that, maybe we'll switch the motor, but the general physics principles are all worked out, the general part choices, there's a list. When you start doing weird robots, there's you
no
get
manual.
into like the deep science where you're just like, be creative, what might work here?
Yeah.
But
Joe,
then you have to test it.
Did you have any thoughts on this
Yeah,
particular topic?
On top of that, all your guys' robots actually can drive around in the test box, and I'm jealous of that. We can drive forwards and backwards about 3 feet, and then we get the test how it drives at like more than 3 feet when the fight starts for the first time. So this last year we didn't actually drive at all until the fight was actually going on. And it worked well, but thankfully, just because like you said, I think you do get an instinct for how to test things in isolation such that you kind of know how they're going to behave in real life, but there's also no substitution for the real thing. There's loads that you can't predict, and there's also, especially once you start getting into brushless stuff, it starts behaving really, really unpredictably. So it's rough, and especially considering a lot of the procedures of BattleBots are oriented around very normal robots, then you have to talk to the safety personnel like, oh, how can we do this? How can we do this? Is this okay? Is this okay? Whereas someone who has something that they've seen before can kind of just shuffle up and do their thing. They know how to, like, okay, you don't need 5 people to help you get your robot off the table that you put wheels from Home Depot on, rolled it all the way to the arena from the pits,
Yeah, with Mammoth, we had to get special permission to go test in the arena one day, just because with brushless, like things at low speed don't necessarily work at high speed. We were trying to find all those bugs out, and just in the test box, there's no way.
Man, those like large robots are difficult.
Yeah. This is like when determining if something's successful or unsuccessful, a lot of it's done in hindsight, I feel, and a lot of it comes down to those things like testing and if your brushless works and all those things. And that just, that's everyone's opinion of either you're a genius or a fool. It's going to come in hindsight mostly.
Yeah, yeah. So this next topic is probably going to be more of a loaded one that we can really dive into, because I think there's a lot to unpack there. But when you go about this idea of designing something that's different, what I really want to dive into is what inspires that process to start, because I think it's so easy to say, I'm going to build a 4-wheel drive bird, or whatever, like the ones that are very common, and there's, known stuff of like, okay, other people have done this, and so it's kind of easy to have that guide to follow. But, what inspires that, and what makes it harder when you're doing something like that, when there's no real major precedent to base it off of? So I'll go ahead and go back to Eli.
Let's see. Yeah, this is a bit loaded. I think a lot of people are competitive, and I think a lot of people really want to win, and that's kind of the main thing driving a lot of their choices. So if they say, oh, let me look at what wins. Okay, this is like bite force or something. This is, like a beater, like a finger tech beater bar. This is, I mean, now maybe it's like, okay, huge is what wins. I need to copy that. But if people want to win, they're gonna take the easiest route to that, and then maybe add a little spin on it, or say, oh, I'll do this but better, right? And what does that mean, better? Like, can you define that? So oftentimes not, but I think that kind of drives a lot of people, and I think all of us here are probably something's wrong with us, because we're like, nah, like White Force won like 3 times, nah, I can do something better. So I mean, at least in my case, like winning isn't my #1 goal. So I would say that what inspires me is just trying kind of new things, kind of pushing the boundaries, exploring new ideas, making people, like Joe said, like making people laugh, or making people, angry, or having some sort of reaction, right? I think that's, I'm hopefully not making people angry, but you never know. But yeah, that's kind of what inspires me. It's not so much just what's good, what's going to get me a win. It's a little deeper than that, I think.
Yeah, I think it really depends on what your goals are. For example, with RIPperoni, our biggest goal was just to get big damage points. The whole founding principle of the robot is, how can we build a robot that does the most damage and is efficient at doing that damage? We want to throw robots into the ceiling. Maybe we break also, but we still threw them into the ceiling, and that's what's really cool.
I think that the way you put it of answering a question is like how I would phrase it too, of like, if you open the question, how do I spin up RIPperoni's disc but also turn? How do I hug something to death? How do I put a spinner on Gabriel? Like all these, a lot of the design leads out from setting yourself a silly question. I mean, I've only done it the one time with the one design, and there's people here who've built lots of stuff who could maybe speak more to cycling that through on different designs. But like my first robot was a tiny vertical spinner with a wedge and all the things it's supposed to have. And my takeaway from building that was that I'm just going to be much worse at this than all the people who've done it for 10 years. And I don't want to do this for 10 years to get good at this. So I'm just going to go do something else.
Yeah, if everyone's going to go this way, maybe you'll get there faster if you go around and you find some kind of shortcut. But sometimes it's not a shortcut.
And it still took
you
years.
end up somewhere else. But just seeing that everybody else is going in one direction, that usually makes me think like, oh, then somebody is probably going to solve that before I solve it. I should try to do something else, and maybe I can beat them to the punch on this other type of technology.
Yeah, what's been hugely helpful for all of my teams is that they're teams, and they're teams of enablers. We can bounce stupid ideas off each other and make them more stupid and more weird and more creatively solved, which has been hugely helpful in pushing these to the extremes that they go to.
Yeah, Joe, I mean, you've made a few robots that are a little bit different.
Yeah, I know too. But I've also like Jonathan said, I did the same thing that he did, and I started off making a pretty conventional. I made it, my first robot was a drum spinner, and then he actually destroyed it for my first event. No, that was but like I think there's also something to be said for starting off somewhat simple, so that you know the problems that you're experiencing are not necessarily of your design, but of your motors and your controllers. Like you're going to encounter a lot of fundamental roadblocks in building a robot. And you don't necessarily want to be questioning, okay, is it because my design is bad, or because like my idea is bad, or because I'm just making rookie mistakes? And so I think there's something to be said for at least practicing with conventional things. That's cool. And then I've gradually stopped making normal things as time has gone on. Yeah.
In order to get an unconventional robot to work, you first need to have really solid construction. All the building blocks have to be there and have to be done correctly so that you can push it forward and do something that isn't tested.
Absolutely.
Yeah, totally. It's like for SMEEEEEEEEE, for instance, it's like a 14-foot span of UHMW. And then you have 4 hinges in the middle. And so there's no weight left over for like a brush drive system or conventional weapon drive, or even room for a lot of things. So then you're already starting off on the back foot of, you need to be at the cutting edge of weight savings and all these different things, and making this incredibly geometrically unsound object sound. Whereas if you start with something like a box that's very simple, then you're at an advantage, and you don't have to necessarily push yourself as hard to come up with exotic solutions to things. So yeah, getting the basics done is key.
But I deeply appreciate the weird questions that come into play when you're like, okay, here's a problem nobody's faced before. How do I make a robot 14 feet long? How do I make a robot 5 feet tall, 4 feet tall? You know, like that's where it gets real interesting.
And the fun of scaling it up, right? Because original SME was a 3-foot piece of plastic that you could buy.
Yeah.
Go buy a 14-foot telephone pole of plastic easily, and bring it places, you know.
Yeah.
Same with Huge. It was a machined block of UHMW, which at the time when we were scaling it up, we considered was impossible to make at the heavyweight scale. And then RIPperoni was made out of giant empty blocks of UHMW. So it is possible, but at this point we're in way too deep. But you know, it's figuring out how to scale it up was like a whole separate part of it. But at least we had that foundation to build from.
Yeah, and to kind of to go along with that, because you know, I mean, I think no matter what kind of robot you're building, this comes into play. But I mean, dealing with setbacks, and I think that for building this kind of robot is especially an issue, because I think you more so have the likelihood of calling into question, like, is this a good idea? Like, should I continue doing this? Is this going to work? You know, how do you deal with those kind of setbacks when it's just not working the way that you had planned on it working? Then I'm actually going to go to Jonathan first, because I mean, I think like this season exemplified that feeling of like seeing it work the way that you always wanted it to, after having such a long time of it not working the way that you wanted it to.
I think in our case, at least, it's, you know, because it's been this one design for so many years at so many classes and stuff. Like there was a vision there. There was an idea of what it was supposed, you know, that's supposed to do. That quote I say all the time. But we didn't know what it was supposed to do, then there's nothing that you're fighting for. There's nothing that you're working for. It would just be like toiling away. But to know the things we needed to do to get it to where it needed to be, especially with 2021's robot, we saw a lot of those puzzle pieces. It just broke itself as soon as it hit anything ever. And so we figured, if we can fix that, we're going to probably have something here. And it was always like some achievable goal in front of us that kept us coming back, versus, you know, you can't set some crazy goal of like, I'm going to go invent something crazy and win BattleBots with it, and it'll be amazing. Like that's unrealistic. You know, it's setting the realistic goal that I just want Huge to hit something next year and not break itself. And everything else kind of fell into place from that.
Yeah. I don't know if anybody else wants to jump in, or I can just go around.
Keep calling.
I think it's easier to maintain motivation, because you're not just building green bite force. You're now building something totally different. And like Jonathan said, your goal is just like, I want to do this. I'm not trying to win BattleBots. Let me see if I can make the biggest fireball there's been, even if it comes from me. Like that's a legit goal, and that's very motivating. So there's a lot of impetus to be found there.
Yeah, the seasons that have been the hardest to work on the robot are the seasons where we didn't have great goals of what we wanted out of it. You know, one year was just like, we're going to switch to brushless, and that doesn't mean much, you know, but then it's like, I want to hit stuff really hard as a change. That's very motivating. It's very exciting, even if you didn't do so well the year before.
Yeah, and Anna, I mean, like I think again is a good example, you know, with RIPperoni not winning that first match and then coming back like with force, you know, so like talk about that motivation.
Yeah, I mean, when we got out of the fight, we immediately were like, all right, these 3 things have to get fixed. And that was the focus. It was like different attachment on the front, figure out if we can run the weapon and the flywheel at full power for the whole time. And I think those were the 2 main things. That was it. It was like all hands on deck. These are the 2 things that we're solving. We're making sure that the flywheel can function reliably. We're making sure that we're not going to damage ourselves if we land in a weird position. And then once we got that squared away, the path was clear.
I think people have generally a good intuition for what's like the theoretical like limit of a design. So like in Jonathan's case, it seemed like he always knew that Huge could be, you know, could be this great robot, right? But it never quite made it until recently, right? I think people have a good intuition for that. Like for me, when I'm designing something, I'll think, okay, maybe this could work. But once you actually start doing it, you start at a certain point, you either run out of ideas for like improvements you could make, and at that point, you kind of have to just call it at that point and say like, this is it, you know, it's not going to do it. But as long as you have like a couple things you want to try, like, oh, well, we could, you know, change the motor, we could change the gearbox, we could do a different material, you know, all these different ideas, until you like are completely run out of ideas, you just want to keep going. You want to keep trying new things and pushing it. And eventually, in a lot of the cases, if you try enough, eventually you get to the point where it is kind of like the ultimate design. In Huge's case, you know, maybe Huge will come back even better in the future. We don't know. You know, is this the peak? Like, I mean, Jonathan's probably not going to tell us. But
I hope so. I mean,
but my point is that, you know, I think people know when there's like a little bit more that the robot can give, a little bit more that the design can give, and until they've exhausted like everything out of it, they're going to keep trying. So I think that's why sometimes this happens, right? That eventually it does end up kind of working out, even though if it's unconventional.
Yeah,
I think it's actually hard to make this bot but better. Like, what does that mean? You need like really specific, like this specifically, the weapon system needs to hit harder. The chassis needs to be stiffer in this section. Like those are specific problems that you can solve, and then you can directly see, did this help me in my next fight? So as long as you have a list of things like that to go through, you can keep pushing the design forward.
Yeah, for Mammoth second year, we set a speed goal and we set a goal, do backflips without breaking chains. And then, so working towards both of those things, those both contributed to our ability to fight. And it wasn't just make it better. It's here's specific targets. Let's see what we can do.
Yeah, Joe?
Yeah, that's like an interesting, it's like a refinement curve, right? Like you can get halfway there with very little effort, and then it's harder and harder and harder to step up to like 90% of the robot's potential and each more. And then you have to know also when to quit and also when not to compromise on what the robot is, especially for people like here who are trying to make things that are out of the ordinary. Like you wouldn't want to take RIPperoni and make it into a box. And maybe that would someday that might be the choice. I don't know. I mean, there's obviously a million like steps along the way, and it's like you could make huge, but the wheels would be small. I don't know. I'm just saying, like there's a point where
small.
No, I know. I'm
it's worse.
Yes, robot's name worse. Smeh with yeah. No, it's like you do have to like you have to like a lot of the comments that I got on SMEEEEEEEEE were like just like don't do this interesting thing the robot is doing or like change the weapon type, and it's like no, I'm going to accept that there's a certain inefficiency associated with a strategy I'm pursuing, and I think it pays off like if competitively too, because I think if every robot was the same, you would have as sort of a difficulty fighting your clones. But then you sort of have to know when not to optimize and when to be yourself in both for your own sanity and also for competitive purposes. Yeah.
I think that something that Joe said is really important, that like when you see comments about your robot and people say, oh, why don't you just make it insert conventional feature? And it's like, well, wouldn't the sport be super boring if everything was bite force? Like, would anyone even want to watch that at that point? Like, having new and interesting robots is what makes it fun to watch. And not knowing the outcome of the fight, when you see two robots and you don't know which one is going to win, those are the most interesting fights to watch. So we're trying to make interesting fights for people, not just something that somebody's going to forget about 5 minutes after watching it.
Yeah, a lot of BattleBots is rock, paper, scissors, but then you throw something like huge in there and you're like,
or tree, I don't know.
Yeah. We thought we had SME with Mammoth. We were like, this is gonna be so easy. This is the best fight we ever had. But it's weird. We never fought something as big as us before, and that really showed.
Yeah, and it's like SME worked better against Mammoth, unfortunately, than it worked against anyone else. So people also thought that Deep Six was going to cut us in half, and it just didn't happen until they got stuck. And so it's like, and that was one of the rough things with SME, was that it was like, I did feel that it worked the best against people who didn't deserve to lose, who had built special and interesting robots that had like cool weaknesses, like exposed wheels, like frames that weren't perfectly machined pieces of aluminum. And then you beat them and it's like, well, what I've made this worse.
That's how I felt against Star Child. It's like, no, we're supposed to be taking on other people together. This isn't how it was supposed to go.
There we go. New rule. Unconventional robots are only allowed to fight conventional robots.
I think that's what unconventional robots want.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, also,
we're down to fight anyone really, but I think it's shows its potential best against conventional robots, because that's how you change the meta, is you have something that consistently beats the meta, and then you can say this is the new thing.
It's also kind of a superpower, because with Mammoth, we were used to fighting 4-wheel drive verts all day. Like we fought them every single time. We knew what to do. They'd never fought a Mammoth. And I'm sure Huge is very similar, like huge fights, small boxes.
I mean, with that was kind of our thing going against Witch Doctor and the vertical spinners a lot this year, was figuring, okay, this is the 100th time I fought one of them, and it's the first time they fought me, and I hope with driving that I can have such an advantage that I win so fast before they figure out how to do this, right? Because they can win. There's strategies, but if I can, knock the belts off their spinner in 4 seconds, the strategies go out the window a little bit. It's that advantage you have, you never build up. Learning how SME fights Mammoth makes you good at fighting SME with Mammoth, or vice versa. You don't learn anything for anybody else, and then nobody actually gets better. You need to fight the conventional robots so you can develop that advantage and then make very good television.
Yeah, absolutely. Something else that I really want to get into is just to throw a couple of examples out there. Like, now that some of these unconventional robots have been out there for a little while, we're starting to see people draw inspiration from them, which I think is amazing. Usually it's more at the lower weight class level. I mean, just to throw a couple of examples out there. I mean, we've seen quite a few of the smaller robots that are similar to Huge, other people trying to do those big wheel styles. And then at NHRL, a robot called Full Court that I think drew inspiration from SME, and I absolutely love that robot. It has a little tiny chair at the end of it to hit people. I'm just curious, what you all think about, like, now that we've seen these robots for a while and more people are starting to think, like, maybe I should build something that's like that. I mean, what do you think about that?
I think for Full Court, I think that's amazing. He actually let me drive one of his 1 pound mini bot alongside Droopy, and it's super interesting seeing how someone else's implementation of No, it's totally his, like everything about it is like functionally different. It's easy to see that when you design your own. It's like, oh, to me, it's a completely different robot, and then it drives totally differently. It's super fun. So yeah, I'm super psyched whenever I see something like that.
Yeah, someone had a tiny mammoth, and we immediately posted it to the team chat and tore apart all the design choices. Like, mistake. We made that one. That could be really interesting. Let's look more into why he's doing that and how it's performing. So I love the extra data. It's also just flattering. Be like, oh.
Yeah, I think it's like the ultimate form of like flattery, right? Like any sort of imitation or inspiration or whatever. You know, I think you know, most people would be really happy to see that. I don't think they would be like, oh, they're copying me. I'm the original.
Somebody vibes with this, and I'm just love
exactly.
that.
And they can push it ahead a little bit, like you said. Like you know, Huges, they were their own thing for a minute, but then other people started building them, and all of mine for the first couple of years, they spun up really slow. They kind of ran away a lot. It was playing to the judges. And then I saw Straddle in the UK, which was a 30-pound huge like robot spinning up in like 2.5 seconds and nuking people. And I was like, he's onto something. I didn't know you could do that with a huge and make weight with it. And that's kind of where the shift came of like, oh, we're not going to go defensive, we're going to go offensive. So on the one hand, it's flattering, but on the other hand, you have the data. It's like seeing someone else implement your design, they're going to do it differently. And there's things they're going to do better, even though it's hard to admit at the time when you first see it. So seeing the things you do better, then you can roll it back into yours and look like a genius.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, next fun question, that a fan submitted, and I think it's a great question. I'll start with Eli, but what are some unconventional bots you could think of that are not your own? So someone else's unconventional bots that you like and appreciate. I mean, I'll throw out there, for me, just because it's one of my favorite robots of all time, I will always love Tentamushi. And I think like Lisa just came up with something that's so fun and amazing. And so that's mine. But go ahead, Eli, and share which ones you like.
So I'm going to confess I have kind of a love-hate relationship with Chomp. I think it's very controversial, but also very progressive. I think it's a terrible combat robot, but I think they're doing some really cool things, and I think that's fair. So I think that's like something, at least they're doing something, you know, something different, something innovative. That's on for the big ones. For the little ones, I mean, I'm gonna shout out, I think Aaron Fan, and he teams up with JMO a lot. I think he does some really cool robots. He has one Pensive Prosciutto that he's just like making he's so smart. He's just making all sorts of crazy shufflers, and that's like a ring spinner, and everything about it is unconventional. So you know, he's really inspiring to me personally. But that's just, you know, a small example. I think there's a lot of really other unique stuff out there.
Yeah, Brice?
I'll say Blip. It looks like a normal robot, but on the inside, it's so wildly different than anything that's come before. I just love the technology inside of it.
Yeah. Joe?
I'm not sure how many people here have watched any of the Chinese shows, but I'm gonna say Marsman, which was this like, it had like 2 cylinder legs, and they all had magnets inside, and it walked by rotating them like this instead of like this. And that kind of inspired my robot Smeezus, which uses hole saws kind of like that as well. I think it's really interesting because they had this incredibly advanced thing where they were switching each magnet, which was gripping, to give you thrust. And then using all this advanced technology, they chose to make the robot like this giant mech walker guy with a flail on top of his head and like a flamethrower. They had all this going for them, and they're like, no, this is going to be. And then, I think a lot of the robots in China were super interesting because it was a very young scene there. It was as if no one had really seen what worked, and everyone had their own ridiculous ideas, like Tootsie, which was the ball robot with a flail on the back. Anything
You haven't even
like
shouted out yet that you brought a 48-inch wheel chain flail monster to China once and then never talked about it ever again.
Just a footnote.
Yeah.
I think I built the world's only vertical chain flail robot, which was called Button Lee. It had 48-inch wheels. It was like huge, but the weapons were on the outsides of the wheels. So you had the weapon running through the wheel. And then, so you had this really interesting thing in gyroscopic precession where if you drive a vertical spinner and then you turn, the robot wants to go up on one wheel. But if you have two flails that do this, the flails will go like this, and the robot won't move at all when you turn. So it was this really bizarre effect. And then so John Reed, who built Terahertz and Beta and all these robots, was saying next to me, he's been fighting since I was a kid. He's like one of my idols. He said, wow, that's interesting. I've never seen that. And I'm like, whoa, I haven't either. I didn't know this was gonna happen.
You did something new. Yeah, I get a lot of mileage out of the Button Lee video because we get asked a lot, like, why not put the weapons on the outside? And I'm like, he did, and it was okay.
And it didn't work.
It worked a little, but I like this design, and I'm not going to change it. Thank you for your suggestion. Goodbye.
For unconventional bots, I really like gyro walkers. Rex and Luke from Copperhead runs kitten mittens. Those are awesome. It's like maximizing your weapon, which is what I'm after. And Fred Moore from our team built a bristle bot, which is also really cool. Has like a drum that's not balanced, and then you have bristles that point in different directions that help it hop in one way or another. And while those bots aren't super maneuverable, if you take one hit from those, you're out. It's lights out immediately. I think those are really cool designs as well.
I want to shout out the tail whip designs also that have been coming around. The Maximizer, Minimizer, Thagomizer. I think there's a bunch of other people like going on that style. I just think like I can't wait to see someone bring that to 250, because it's enough metal in the arena to give you really good magnets and get a really good like swing on it. Like it's gonna blow people away in a year or two, I think.
Yeah, those are looking really scary. Yeah, honestly.
There is a small huge that has already lost to one, so that's how you know it's up to the task.
I'm still waiting on a hovercraft robot. If someone doesn't do it, I'm going to do it like next year. So just putting that out there.
We've talked about hover Doomba, and that was a step too far even for us. So
at that way,
I want to see you, and I'll let you know if I can help.
You need like a jet engine, I feel like, at that weight or something. But yeah. Maybe the smaller weights are fine.
Yeah.
So.
You can get away with a lot of the smaller weights.
Yeah.
In some ways, it was that we were good enough with the smaller weights that we didn't have to learn things we were supposed to learn a lot earlier about building robots. You know, it's 3 seasons of BattleBots before we were asking ourselves how long it takes to spin up and figuring out how to calculate that. I think most people have to figure that sort of thing out before. But with the smaller weights, it just works. So you don't have to worry about it. So yeah, hovercraft might be a bit better at Norwalk at first.
Yeah. That's a good point though. Like I think a lot of these ideas, I think just my recommendation is that people do start small. You know, I'd like to talk about that people should kind of prototype and start small. And even if you're going to go straight to BattleBots, like at least just in your garage, like build a small model or something at least, and try to get a feel for the, you know, whether it's the proportions or one small part of the system. Like I think it's really important. The testing part, I think, is really important if you want to be successful. The more you can test, the better you're going to do. That's why I feel bad for a lot of us, especially like Joe. Like, I mean, how do you even test this thing? Like SMEEEEEEEE is so dependent on the opponent as well. The interaction of the two halves with the other opponent is something you cannot predict or even test probably. So, you know, you're basically just doing it on the fly. So, but if you can test as much as you can, I highly recommend it. It makes you look really smart when you show up with something that looks crazy and it like works. It's like, well, I've been testing it for months, so
yeah.
I have another really good question, because this kind of came up at the last NHRL event, and you kind of alluded to this earlier, Jonathan, with fans saying like huge should be banned. Is there ever like taking unconventional too far where it's like, no, like somebody shouldn't be allowed to do that? Because I know I don't think I've ever seen so much fan angst than at the last NHRL event when Spitfire was competing, and a lot of people felt it's a drone, that's not fair, how are people supposed to hit it? So I'm curious to hear your opinions on, like, is that taking it too far, or is it somebody just needs to figure out how to solve that problem. You know, somebody eventually did, but like which end of that spectrum do you fall on? So I'll go to you, Eli, first, especially since you competed at that event.
Yeah, I was, someone asked me, they're like, what's your plan for Spitfire? And I'm like, I'm just praying that I do not hit them in the bracket because I don't have a plan. And I'm going to go out on I don't know if anyone else agrees with me, but my hot take is that I do not appreciate having a drone in what is effectively a ground robot competition. I'm not going to like say that they're bad or they should be banned or anything like that. I just wouldn't do it personally. I wouldn't bring a drone. So that's my hot take. You know, you can at me in the comments if you want, it's fine. But at the same time, more power to the builders who brought it. I mean, there's nothing in the rules against it. They cleared it with the TO. There's a whole bracket a month ahead of time, or at least 2 weeks ahead of time, saying they're coming. So, you know, you can't blame them for it, but at the same time, I can't really approve necessarily of that. I think that might be a little too far, and that's a lot coming from me. So anyway.
Yeah, and Jonathan, you were there too.
Yeah. And I was thinking about it as it was going during the day. So, you know, my thoughts kind of come back to talking to fans, talking to people about the rules of robot combat. Why can't you dump water on somebody? Why can't you, you know, do an EMP? Because it's extremely illegal, but that's beside the point. A lot of it really comes back to the origins of the sport, which is to be performed in front of a screaming audience. And if what you're doing is not going to entertain somebody, then it probably, you know, if it's not going to entertain somebody and it's an auto win, then we should fix something to make it an auto lose. And so my thought on the drones was like, this is not very entertaining. If there was some requirement for them to physically interact, now there's risk for the drone. If it has a crane off the bottom, right? That would be, now we're talking. I want to watch that. I don't want to watch it sit there stationary and just blow fire near the other guy and auto win. So that's where I would go with things. And I think that that's kind of how we can drive unconventional stuff, but keep it fair a little bit more broadly, where if the weight bonuses get too crazy and the only way to win beetles is to be 6 pounds and everything's a walker and stuff, well, maybe we should dial it back a little bit. Maybe it's gone a little too far. And it's just okay to modify these things. Like just because they've been this way for a while, if it starts to affect the show or affect the goals of the tournament or anything like that, that's when I think it's, you know, not to be afraid to change it, right? Like every other F1 changes the regulations every 10 minutes on what they want the cars to look and act like. You know, you can get what you want out of the final product. You just have to kind of work with the builders and make little changes and hope you don't mess up things too badly.
Hold on, Jonathan. So you're telling me that
if you get too good, they should ruin the shuffler weight bonus. That's what I'm saying.
Well, how would you feel about how would you feel about if someone put some sort of like a cow catcher on the front of their robot and just held you in a corner for 3 minutes? Do you think that would be something people want to watch, or?
I don't think they did. I think that was
a
lot
so?
the madness about that. But you know, on the one hand, it's a legal attachment. On the other hand, it was kind of already illegal because there's rules about pinning, and that's the reason why everybody hated it, was that you had to watch what, you know, it was banned in 1999 because I think Voltronic picked up Biohazard and just held it in the air for 3 minutes driving in a circle because there was no rule against doing that. And everyone's like, well, damn, that was terrible television. We should probably ban that. And I think the, you know, bike rack thing's the same way. It's like, well, damn, that was awful. How do we not have to do this again?
Yeah, absolutely. Brice.
I had a great answer, and then Jonathan said it better than I could. So as long as it's still entertaining, as long as it's not a one shot, let's see what happens. Let's try some weird stuff.
Yeah. One thing that's sort of interesting though is that these things do somewhat tend to be self-solving problems, in that if there's a drone that's sweeping to the way of every single bracket, like if everyone comes with a 4-foot carbon fiber pole on their robot, the drone is going to stop doing that well. Just as I bring a crusher and then everyone sees in the bracket and they bring armor and I can't crush anyone anymore. In the same way, the other interesting thing though is to think about the fact that at, for instance, NHRL, like the same sort of robot usually wins every single time. There's obviously exceptions, like those horizontal kind of swing around robots have started to win a little bit, and Droopy wins. But then the question is, okay, so if we're toying with the rules as motorsports do, as F1 does, like you said, are we appropriately taking advantage of the fact that that can be done to make the outcomes of these things more interesting already? And I don't necessarily think that we are. I think, like, if you have a robot that does well and you don't want it to do well in 1 or 2 events, and then you penalize it after 40 events of the same kind of robot winning, that's kind of, I don't know. I'm not saying it's wrong, but I'm also saying if we're going to leverage that power, it should also be used for good. It should be used to sort of disincentivize, like, just make it interesting, make it so you can't see exactly who's going to win every single time. Maybe the weight bonus, maybe it shouldn't be shufflers, maybe it should be not a spinner, maybe it should be like
hovercraft.
Cover, yeah.
Maybe it should be
I
2
think,
weapons. Where it gets complex is
definitely.
when to pull those levers, and that's where I
Yeah.
don't want to be anybody, right? Because the drone won 2 fights, right? There was 160 beetle weights. It went 2 steps up the bracket, so it's not like it stomped the whole world. But on the other hand,
Yeah. For that one guy they beat, I feel probably pretty bad.
right?
And are we gonna do anything about it? Are they gonna do anything about it? I don't know. But yeah, I don't necessarily think it's great for the sport. So
Yeah, it's an interesting problem to solve. What do you think, Anna?
I think for me, the biggest thing is safety. I think, like, when you build something unconventional, you have to kind of make sure that the unconventional doesn't mean that it's like really unsafe, or that it's gonna melt, the battle box or something like that. But we do have safety personnel who make sure that, that's not gonna happen. And if the rules say it's legal and the safety team says it's safe, then guess we gotta engineer some new machines to take down this idea. And like Joe said, I think that when a new problem comes up, people find a way to engineer around it. And again, this is all pushing the sport forward. And then maybe in a few years, people will say, oh yeah, the drone thing, this is what you do. And now they're no longer a threat because we collectively figured out the answer.
We all bring our carbon fiber tubes with us.
Yeah, everybody brings a rake,
Right?
a mini
a
rake,
little
yeah.
baby rake, and game over, right? And then maybe they have to build an anti-rake attachment, and now you have another arms race of
Now we got a
going
sport
back
going
and
here.
forth.
Yeah.
Instead
I
of
mean,
forks,
yeah.
it's going to be rakes.
I mean, it's okay. I mean, obviously with everything, people are gonna go too far, and there's gonna be a balancing process, like Joe's saying. Like maybe I went too far with hot wings, making it 5 pounds instead of.
Yeah, I was gonna say we are the people who go too far with bad ideas. That's us.
Yeah, so it's like, I mean, what's too far, what's not too far? It's up to the eye of the beholder in a lot of cases. But
Yeah, I mean, people get upset about huge. Oh, it's too tall. It should be smaller. Why is it allowed to be that tall? And it's like, well, because it's cool and it's good, and the rules don't actually say that it can't do that. So if there's enough, push from the builders who say we really don't want this to exist, we think that it's dangerous, we think that it's gonna go out of hand some way, then we as builders, make that known and work to get it fixed. But just because somebody has a cool new idea doesn't mean that it's bad. And let's see what happens.
Right.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's how these things could play, is like maybe shufflers will be countered because everyone will start bringing undercutters or something like that, right? And huges, obviously there are ways to solve that problem, and people have adapted their designs for better and worse, in a lot of cases. Like it's, I think, what makes it fun in a lot of cases.
all right, I'm gonna go off on a bit of a tangent because you just reminded me of something, Jonathan.
Oh no.
BattleBots, not oh no. I mean, yeah, maybe oh no. BattleBots is so interesting, or combat robotics is so interesting to me, because people talk about rock, paper, scissors, but it's really, we touched on this, it's really a lot more complex than that. It's, there's 5, 6, 7 different types, main robot types, and there's more by the season, right?
Mhm.
And no other sport, no other competition I can really think of is quite like that. I mean, you have people compare BattleBots to like UFC or wrestling. And it's like wrestling is just one dude versus another dude, one's 6'2", one's 6'3", you know, one's 220, one's 230. Like this is basically the same thing. But BattleBots, you have this, you know, 8 foot tall, you know, robot that'll launch you versus this like compact 2 foot brick that'll, you know, smack you into the ceiling. Like it's
The very
completely
early
different.
days of UFC
Sure,
had
yeah.
that,
Yeah,
where
maybe
you'd
had
have
different
a
fighting
boxer
styles.
going against a wrestler going against jujitsu. But as
Right.
the sport evolved, they kind of all found that happy middle ground. And
Yeah,
what I appreciate about robots is that we haven't found that happy middle ground. We're just sending it in more and more directions.
exactly. Yeah.
There's a lot of good things to be said. A lot of things to be said in both directions about having a selection committee and event like BattleBots where it's going to be this much higher profile. But you know, engineers we can tune for anything. And if you make us tune for unique and creative to get accepted, we're going to tune for unique and creative to get accepted. And it's forced people to tune for that a little bit in ways that I think has made it more interesting and helped keep it from stagnating. Because if you let people go build 4-wheel drive verts, there's going to be 49 of those in one huge, and I'm going to win every year, and it'll be amazing. But it's better when we're giving people an incentive to do something unique. It keeps the sport fresh, like you said, like the early days would be, rather than letting it kind of just go pure meritocracy. You know, all the verts win.
Yeah.
Agreed.
And then the last question that I have, and this one, you know, I'm really curious because even though the bot that I am building now is going to be a 2-wheel drive drum, which I know is super boring, you know, but I've committed that when I build a second bot, it's going to be something unconventional and crazy. So for each of you, what is the best advice that you could give somebody who's looking to build something that's a little bit different and out there about how to start and kind of carry through that process? So Eli, I'll go ahead and start with you.
I think I already said this, but my advice is to not shake things up too much. Take 75% of something that you know will work and play with the other 25% and just push it as far as you can, but only on that 25%. And the kind of with that, my second advice is make sure you test that like a couple times at least, you know, make some prototypes, you know, make a little sub assembly you can test. Just try to get familiar with it because you're trying something new, you're trying something that maybe no one's ever done. So do yourself a favor, give yourself some time, you know, don't just rush it. You know, it's like your little baby, you know, you want it to grow up and be good and healthy and strong. So if you don't nurture it, your design or your robot, no, you're really not doing yourself a favor. So definitely don't go too crazy, but you know, stick to your guns and test.
Yeah. Brice.
So first off, my normal first robot advice is just build something bad. Don't worry about it. Get it in the box. You're doing that. Good job. My unconventional robot advice is probably the same as my dating advice, which is figure out what kind of weird works for you and just go for it. Don't try to be something you're not, but if there's something that captures your heart, then just go for it.
Solid advice. Joe.
I would say I'm taking Brice's pity advice. That's good. What's it called? I would say assume every part that you take for granted in a robot now has been iterated on by thousands of people that you don't know, and that's how it's gotten to that point. And then think about everything that you're doing new and try to imagine how far it would be taken if it was iterated on to the extent at which everything else is. For instance, if you take a drive solution that's already in every other robot, you assume that that's pretty well sussed out, and then you're going to try to do something totally different. Like I remember when I was building the hinges on heavyweight SMEEEEEEEEE, I would text Jonathan like, "Are these hinges big enough?" He's like, "Can you make them bigger?" And I'm like, "Okay, I'll try." And then so I would say like assume every single part of it needs to be developed to the point that the most basic elements that you're borrowing from other robots have been. And you're probably, you'll never be able to iterate to the extent that a million minds can, but that is where I try to start when I'm thinking something totally new, is that take it to its ultimate form as best you can.
Yeah, Anna?
Yeah, I agree with Eli, and I think I've said that on this podcast before. If you're new to robots, new to engineering, start by just trying to copy what is out there. Don't bite off too much from the bat, because you're going to be disappointed and it's going to be really difficult, and that's not going to build your love of the sport. There's plenty to learn even when you are trying to copy something else or combine two things or even just build a kit. You learn skills doing that, and then every time challenge yourself to go one step further, and that way it doesn't feel like it's work. It doesn't feel like you're out of your depth, so you're overwhelmed. You just have this one little goal, another little goal, and all of a sudden you can look at the progress you've made and all the robots you've built and how they have drifted in one direction or another, and then you find that your passion is this kind of robot. Really getting your hands on something and building is the best thing you can do to get better. You're not going to get better just from continuously doing research and always fiddling with your CAD. At some point, you're going to have to buy the parts, plug them in, and see what happens.
Yeah, and Jonathan?
I think everybody has had a lot of great advice, and a lot of that is stuff, you know, we all started from a place of things that we knew would work, and left the questions more limited in just the construction side, and you know, didn't want to be afraid of oversolving those questions and overthinking how you put a robot like Huge together, because no one had ever done that before. So you had to kind of make sure it wasn't gonna, you know, fall in half as soon as you hit anything or something like that. I think just the side of it that I want to talk to is like the mental side of it. Takes so much longer to build something unique and so much longer to tune it. You know, the first Huge took 9 months, and like 4 months in, I picked it up and dropped it, and the wheel fell off. Like you have to go through so many more steps of all the things you can't take for granted just to make it work at all. And it's, you know, it's one of the most, like, if there's one thing I could fix in the sport, it would be that you see so many new people show up to places like Norwalk and they have a super interesting idea executed with no experience, and you're like, well, damn, if you really put 12 revisions into this, it could be something. But I don't know if you're, you know, after you're 0-2, if you're going to put 12 revisions into it. And you know, there's a ton of events I showed up to with Huge that were 0-2, and I don't know where it would be if I hadn't won a couple fights in my first time out. But like those kind of, that admission, it's going to take a really long time, and we're going to make it work anyways, and we'll get there. You know, I think that's what creates unconventional designs that are memorable, versus, you know, an 0-2 fun idea that I never saw again.
Yeah, build it for you. Don't build it for someone else. Build the bot you want.
Yeah. That is all very good advice. So yeah, I mean, you know, I think weird robots are great. I think that we need to have more of them, because it makes things more interesting. I mean, like you've all said, when you don't know how the fight's going to go, that's one of the most exciting things that I can think of. So, you know, hopefully we'll see more of that. But thank you so much, all of you, for joining in this show, and for fans that are watching. If you have thoughts, if you have feedback, please share in the comments. You know, let me know, and please make sure that you like, subscribe, all of that good stuff, as I will continue doing more of these amazing panels, and get lots of feedback and opinions. So just keep supporting combat robotics, and we'll see everybody next time on the show.